So, with that, it is my very, very big pleasure to, for the next panel conversation, invite Katherine back on stage to facilitate the conversation. And with her, we will have Alexandra Vranyac-Wheeler, Brenden, Mischewski, and Rebecca Fox to be discussing reimagining funding and building a sustainable future for vocational education. No mai haere mai.
Surprise.
Yeah.
Can we get a handheld for Brenden, please? Thanks very much, Stu. So Brenden didn't know he was going to be coming on this panel this morning, so we've just surprised him.
Hello.
Great. Okay, so we are here to talk about the work that Brenden led with Roger Smyth, a funding, an exploration of reforming funding in vocational education and construction and infrastructure. We were looking at how to better align educational outcomes with workforce needs, support long-term investment in skills development, and promote equity, particularly for Māori, for Pacific peoples, for women, disabled learners in the vocational education system. Brenden, I'm going to ask you to just give us a very quick overview of the process that you went through. But before you do that, I'm going to start with Alex. If you could just introduce yourself to the room, please.
Sure. It was really nice to walk in the room and let you know most of the people here. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Alex Vranyac-Wheeler and I'm the Chief Executive of Master Electricians. And prior to that, have held many roles in industry training, but also the Tertiary Education Commission in MB. So thank you for having me, Katherine.
Thanks, Alex. Rebecca?
Oh, good morning, and I'm really pleased to be here. Fantastic to see so many familiar faces as well, some I haven't seen for ages. I'm currently the Workforce Development Manager for Civil Contractors. I've worked in ITOs for a number of years and also private training establishments. And my background probably is a little bit odd in this role. I come from a regulatory background, so I wear lots of hats when I do things like this. It's great to be here. Looking forward to the conversation.
Kia ora, Rebecca. Thanks very much. Brenden,
And
man of the hour.
me too, always looking forward to a surprise conversation. So, kia ora koutou, ko Brenden Mischewski tōku ingoa. I'm an independent consultant working mainly in tertiary education and health sector over the years. Lots of familiar faces here, and lovely to see so many people that I've interacted with over this time. Alex and I were just reflecting when we were preparing for this, we're having an initial discussion about this session, that some of these conversations we were having 15, that dates us a few years ago. But has been...
it was 15 years ago.
Okay.
I think you called each other
a long time,
didn't you?
I'll pretend it's 10. In terms of the process, for both Roger and I, this has been a really interesting exercise and a little bit of a homecoming for both of us with our background in policy and funding and a little bit of quality assurance over that time. To get to where we got to, we spent quite a bit of time interrogating the literature. So for those of you that have had the pleasure of looking at the literature review that sits behind the discussion paper, a couple of hundred references in there, and really benefited, I think, from Roger's expertise and experience working internationally, particularly the work he's done with OECD, bringing that wider perspective. We benefited as well from interviews with 49, we tried to make it 50, but 49 key informants from right across the sector. So everybody from employers through to staff of workforce development councils, those of you at the coalface actually delivering teaching and learning, and people with expertise in various areas, whether or not it's working with Māori learners or disabled learners, and so on. And then we've gone through a process of trying to synthesize that into a set of recommendations, which were our kind of starting point, and that was consulted on with the sector more broadly, and we followed up with a number of targeted conversations with people to make sure we'd covered all the insights, and then final reports being prepared, and I think that's what we're talking about today.
It's almost out.
Yes.
Yeah. So there were 5 recommendations that came through from the discussion paper that went to consultation, and I'm hoping that we have them on the screen so that I can just relay them back to the audience. Stand by. Nope, they're not coming up. Okay, then what we're gonna do is we're gonna throw back to Brenden, and we're gonna put him on the spot to see if he can remember all 5 of the recommendations. Oh no, I've got a hand in the air. One moment, please. What we thought we'd do is share the 5 recommendations with you, and then that will help shape the conversation that we're going to have next. We've got representatives from two industries who in fact are going to have their own industry skills boards in the latest round of vocational education and reform. And levies is of course a huge topic of conversation for all of the sector, but we will see an electrotechnology and IT industry skills board stood up, and we will see an infrastructure skills board stood up too. So very exciting, and I know that we have some differing opinions on the panel, so I'm looking forward to a robust conversation with the team. And Brenden, what I'm going to do is throw to you, because I think you can remember the first one.
Well, I can remember all 5 because Rebecca's given me your notes.
Oh. I love that.
So I think stepping back a little bit and just thinking about what we're walking into, those of you that follow Tertiary Insight probably saw the viability reports that were released by Te Pukenga earlier today. Roger and I sort of reflect that what we're doing here is shifting deck chairs with the reforms, but not dealing with the fundamental issues that underpin both why some of these institutions have struggled with viability over, a 15-year period in some cases, and why we're not necessarily getting the outcomes that we expect from tertiary and vocational education. So the first change that we were proposing is taking more of a people-centred approach to how we work with and support learners. So that's really well in line with what TEC's been promoting through the Oretanga work, the Learner Success Framework work, and taking a whole-of-organisation approach. What we're suggesting is trying to extend that to embed more of the values that you would see with initiatives like whānau ora and enabling good lives, to actually think about learners as people in context, as part of families and communities, and trying to deal with the wider issues that sit behind that. Shall I keep going?
Yes, keep going.
The second one was around devolved decision making. So that's something that our New Zealand Initiative colleagues get really excited about, because we can talk about words that I mangle like subsidiarity. So the idea that decisions should be made closest to where people have got information to make those decisions. Yeah. The way we think that ought to be operationalised is by giving industry skills boards and regions a really strong voice in determining how funding allocations are made. So taking that power away from nice people on the terrace in Wellington that have their own particular ways of doing things, and actually driving that to where people have got best information and are best aligned to both industry, regional, community needs. The third was about strengthening the investment approach. So those of you that have the pleasure of completing investment plans know that TEC take due regard of those, but actually the main determinant of what funding organisations receive in the following year is their performance in the last. So it's all about volume. And the system works exceptionally well for large organisations like University of Auckland, University of Otago, and basically, to reflect Catherine's earlier comment, it does what it is designed to do. What it doesn't do is it doesn't meet the needs of what we would characterise as low volume, high value provision, where actually the returns are outsized relative to the amount of money that goes into them. The fourth is to increase work-based learner fees. So initially we came to you all and said, actually, this is a really good idea. We need to have learners and apprentices put more skin in the game. We got some robust constructive feedback that maybe that was a bit of a stretch. We still think there's some merit in opening up access to the student loan scheme to those learners to make sure that's equitable across both in work and off-job training, but happy to concede that that was a bridge too far for some folks. The fifth one, and always a topic of interest for people, is to introduce some industry training levies. So we're all about expanding the amount of resource that goes into supporting tertiary and vocational education. Don't want to say poor cousin, but actually relative to the kinds of revenues that go to some of our larger institutions can be a struggle, I think, to resource all of the support that learners need. So we're proposing a modest increase to the building levy, the introduction of a new infrastructure levy for those large infrastructure projects, the new highways and tunnels and those sorts of things. And then finally, a levy on migrant work visas, so that for organisations that were choosing to recruit from overseas, actually having a consequences, perhaps a stronger word, but having some way of them supporting the investment that we need in our local population.
Thanks very much, Brenden, and Rebecca's notes. So I'm going to pass to you, Alex, now, just for your overall views on the recommendations from the funding paper.
I mean, I think most people in the room who've had some connection with industry training would largely agree with the recommendations. They're things that we've been talking about for many, many years. I think it's how do we actually disrupt, as you've alluded to, disrupt the system and look at the system connected to other parts of the government system. So vocational education at the moment sits very siloed within tertiary education, which also sits very siloed. And I think if we actually are going to disrupt with some of these recommendations, and I do support all of the recommendations in the report, then we actually need to take a much more holistic approach and think about the things that we're doing with regard to stimulating the economy as being one very connected to vocational education. So that would be my feeling.
How would that go down with your members?
My members would love that.
Okay.
I mean, I think, you're thinking about employers. Again, employers are focused on growing their business. They're focused, well, we hope, focused on growing and actually improving their own productivity and the industry's productivity. And they know that in order to do that, a skilled workforce is one of the ways. It's not the only way, but it's one of the ways. And when you're juggling mana and mahi, you're juggling a whole lot of other MSD stimulated areas, and then you've got regional grants that you can access through MB, it starts to become a very complicated system for an employer to navigate. So I think they would absolutely support a connected system that says if you want to grow your business and you want to become more productive and you want to give back to your community and your family, then actually here is a range of solutions that are connected for you. So yeah, I think they'd be in full support.
Thank you. Rebecca, any thoughts from CCNZ?
Yeah, plenty actually. Well, we do actually support some of the things in the report, but others we don't. And a lot of that is to do with the fact that civil contractors are really hurting. And I'm sure people are seeing that in the media, they're seeing that in projects. And while civil contractors continue to hurt and they cannot have visibility over a large pipeline of work, there's a significant reluctance to invest in training, particularly formalised training. So employers in infrastructure train anyway. Most of it's not seen because it's the work that's done by supervisors and mentors already there. So we're already training just outside of the NZQA framework. And I will pick up on your point, Alex, about it's a really complex place for them to navigate. It is. And I think understanding what that ecosystem looks like would help contractors definitely going forward. And I'm going to say that from my background as a training advisor for years as well. I have socialised some of the elements of the report with our members, and I'll be honest, there was horror on their face. They've just gone through so much and are going through so much. The concept of employees that might be able to access student loans that could put them further into debt when they're already not earning enough money. The fact that they might be levied and they couldn't understand what that looks like because there's no long-term view. It's difficult, and it's a real chicken and egg situation. What comes first, the visibility of the pipeline of work so people can have a determination to invest, or do we put structures in place that people are required to invest? And where we are at right now is that it would be one step too far for infrastructure to do that.
Okay.
Not saying that it couldn't happen, but I think there's some other things that probably need to happen first. Yeah.
When we met the other day, we talked about is the time not now? Because there is so much change and flux and change and new organisations and new opportunities. So what are your thoughts on, should we double down and bite the bullet? Is the time now? The old guard's moving on. We've got a new breed of employers coming through. We have a crisis. Inland Revenue released some statistics most recently, $1.3 billion owed to them. About $1 billion of that was from the construction and infrastructure sector. So is the time not now to double down on investment that we could perhaps even feed back into supporting employers to run better businesses or to bring people through in training and development? Any thoughts? Yeah, Rebecca.
I think the concept's a good one, but right now I'm going to go back to the fact, we've got tier 1 companies that are halving their business model. They've halved their revenue, they've halved their staff. All of their staff have moved off to Australia. They're not coming back. That's the ones that they've had to halve, and they're busy selling their plant into Dubai. So when we're talking about tier 1s doing that, the concept of if not now, when, is how can they see now? So I still sit with, I don't believe that we can do it right now with the structures as potentially could be in this report, but I think there's another conversation to be had, and I think it's important to have it around what could it look like if it was a slightly softer approach. Recognise there is a mountain of work that's coming. We don't have the workforce that we need right now. We need to increase the workforce. We absolutely have to increase supervisory and mentoring capability, and that's key to be able to bring those new people on, give them a good experience, and then actually keep them within employment so we don't lose them. And I think once we can sort of finesse some of that and then work a slightly different structure around that, then we might be onto something, but not right now for infrastructure. They are just hurting too much.
Yeah.
Yep. We
Alex,
need to get some work back.
Yes. Thanks, Rebecca. Alex, you had an interesting take on this when we talked the other day.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I mean, running a member organisation, and many of you have done that, so probably feel you're stuck in a really difficult place. But at the start of this year, we increased our member fees by 30%, which was a huge increase in the economic climate that we're in right now. And a lot of people I had sort of say to me, "Are you mad? What are you doing?" And much like Catherine's alluded to, we hadn't increased fees for 9 years. COVID came, we still didn't increase fees. We actually grew in COVID times because when things got really tough, our members started to panic, so they joined us so that we could support them. So for 9 years we did nothing, we didn't increase our fees, and we ended up in a really big hole last year, despite selling quite a bit of our asset base and growing in reserves, but actually cash flow was still an issue. So I think for us, when we look at relevancy, you talked about, and you talked about how do you grow business ambition. You need to be able to sell that proposition to members. It's actually not enough to say we're going to keep giving you what you're getting, and you're going to pay more for it, or we've got this opportunity to actually sell them a new vision that is actually going to help them grow their business and grow their industry. And then you sort of talk about what we've alluded to, which is a better connected system, growing their ambition to actually lean in and want to grow their business and take some risks, and with that comes reward. So I think it's around how you talk to business about that, and coming back full circle, we did increase our membership fees by 30%, and it has been the worst recession for some of our members in 40 years. We haven't dropped in membership numbers yet, so I think there is something in there to explore further.
We talked on, I think it was Friday, about the free rider problem, Brenden, and the concept that there are those who train and there are those who definitely do not train, but they always benefit from the investment that other organisations are making up front. Any thoughts or reflections on what you've heard through your conversations with industry through the paper on this free rider problem? And then we might also throw to our rest of our panel.
Sure. So if I can channel Brian for a minute, who unfortunately Brian Dillon was intending to be on this panel, but unfortunately unable to. Brian was pretty firm with me when I had conversations with him about this. That it's important not to overstate the free rider issue. He put it to me, and I think many of you in the room will agree, that organisations, businesses are making rational business decisions about, whether or not to take on the opportunity cost that comes with hiring an apprentice, and then the benefits that come, a little bit later in their career when you've got a trained person who understands your company and how you work. And that actually a very arguably a high proportion of businesses in construction at least do take on apprenticeships, and I think notwithstanding that, I think we shouldn't shy away from the notion that it is possible for people to navigate their way through this in a way that means that they're not necessarily making the same contributions as their peers, but I think the more positive vision that you want to convey about these kinds of interventions and changes we're proposing is about, I think offering a really compelling value proposition for those who you're asking, if you can put your hand in their pocket to say, actually, there's opportunities here to support you to develop your capability, to train, to be able to be better leaders, managers, of your businesses, but that sometimes there's a cost. It's while we did say that we thought the changes were a package and should all come together, it's not to say that they would all need to happen at the same time. And certainly, labour market ministers have been interested in smaller scale trials of different kinds of levies in this space, which might suggest an opening for those of you interested in exploring that, to look at different ways of unlocking that bargain, I suppose.
Any thoughts, Rebecca, Alex?
I'm just going to grab your point, about the value proposition, because I think that's really important. And we're having this conversation with our members with a slightly different tack at the moment, which is the value proposition that sits with trade certification. So we run a civil trade certification scheme, and 1,000 people have come through the scheme. It's about valuing people that are qualified, competent and highly successful in their roles. So it means the value proposition is different to the employer, to the person that has the trade cert, to the people that are procuring that service. So I think value is actually a really important part, and if members can see value, and industry can see value, they will jump on board. One of the things I've been thinking about, and hopefully, Alan's not in the room, and Alan gave me the pass to be here, so I'll be in trouble later, is I think that it would be helpful as part of our membership fees is that we actually collected something for education around that, and that came forward as a form of a levy as opposed to a levy. And that's what I wanted to say about, we're not against levies, but it's about what does it look like to industry, because we're already collecting fees the same way as you are. And it's how do we actually manage that differently. And then the free rider element's probably not something I want to have a big enter into, particularly it's not something I think we have a massive issue with. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, great. Alex?
Well, we have an industry that actually does quite well in terms of training. I think about 25 to 30% of our industry take on an apprentice. Do they take on enough? No. So we've got, and I alluded to that earlier, we've got a potential risk and ambition problem in our industry, which is, if you've been following some of the news with a lot of the big construction companies that are going under, a lot of our members have been adversely affected by that. So we've got members and business owners that don't want to grow their business for fear of, potentially losing that for money that's not held in trust. And so what happens is we end up with a generation that starts to become really risk averse. So I think, for us, our members already are committed to training. Are they training enough? Probably not. Just picking up on your point, Bex, that for us, we invested last year in a continuous professional development program, which sits outside of the NZQA framework. And the rationale for that was actually that we had a really poor uptake of new products and technologies coming into the market. So in my sort of going around talking to suppliers, wholesalers, manufacturers of electrical product, the number one issue for them was that they weren't selling enough because they actually didn't have people adopting the new technologies. We did some work with ECA late last year, and they said, 78% of our industry members were really excited about the new renewables and new technologies that were coming down the pipeline. Only 10% felt competent and confident in being able to take those up. So we've got solar now with AI, installed. We don't have the workforce that can actually program that AI, let alone install it. So we've sort of leaned in and said, actually, let's invest in helping our industry lift their capability and their confidence in doing that, and at the same time, let's help them grow their ambition to diversify their business and grow. So, yeah, that's really the bit that we've added. Yeah.
I'm just going to pause there and remind you that Slido is there for your questions. We have a panel. We're keen to ask the panel what you are wanting to know from them. So please don't hesitate to throw a question in and uprate it, or if you see someone else's question. So we have two there. Oh, goodness. How about we start with how about we merge MOE and MSD? Seeing as tertiary education seems to be expected and possibly can solve many social issues. I'm not going to look at the person who might have put that up on the wall, but any thoughts from our panel? We will start with you, Brenden.
It's an interesting question. I'm declarations of conflicts of interest, maybe. I'm doing some separate work with the Food and Fibre CEs, which is a group of industry association leaders in that sector. One of the things yet to be released that they are proposing is that there be some cross appropriation, coordination of all the money that goes in to support the primary industries. Without answering the question directly, I think there's probably some scope for better coordination, which I think reflects that comment that both Alex and Bex have made about the fragmentation, complexity, of the system. So.
Yeah. Any thoughts from either of you?
Look, I mean, I agree with Brenden. I mean, we've got the same issues in our health system. We've got the same issues right across the board. So I think if we really are going to entertain that conversation, then it's a much bigger conversation. But I actually think it's one that we need to have. And there are other countries that operate like that already. You look at Australia and what they're doing around energy. They're not just looking at their electrotechnology, ISB in isolation. They're actually looking at what does energy reform look like in their country, and why do they need to look at it like that? Because electricity is going to generate and power up the whole country. So they're looking at it in a much more holistic way, and I think we have to if we want to disrupt.
Yeah, I was asked recently, if we were going to collect levies, where would they go? I don't think that's the question that we need to answer right now. The question that we need to answer is what's the collective vision that we have for what we want to achieve for each of our sectors. Yeah. Rebecca, any thoughts on that tricky one?
Oh, I think it's about system change, isn't it? To channel George, if we can do that. George keeps talking about systems change, and we can look at our government departments, and whether you rate them or you don't rate them, they're incredibly siloed, and I think we operate as a function very similarly to being siloed, and there's a time to change that. And the work that ConCOVE have been doing over the last 5 years has really challenged, I think, a lot of that thinking around systems change and bringing people together in a more collective way. Could we marry MOE and MSD? I think they'd divorce quite quickly. But I think if we take that systems change approach, what could they be doing differently and working collaboratively on? Absolutely.
I think just on that too, if you take a much more strategic approach, you won't get the changes and the fluctuations around the how when you get succession government changes. You're actually agreeing a collective policy that, yes, we want to grow our renewables in some form or another, and if we do that, then actually the how may change a little bit, but actually where you're going is really clear because everyone's bought into it.
Yeah, that's right. Wendy's given us a lovely question here. There seems to be an amount of non-accredited training being done by industry. What is being undertaken to have that recognised towards formal learning? What would you like to see happen perhaps in your industries?
Oh, can I start?
Yes,
I think that's a fantastic question. That's something that when I was working as a training advisor in primary, we did a lot of work. We aligned industry training with, and I've got one of my colleagues in the room here, actually I'm looking at right here, Andy. Remember when we mapped a lot of the internal training against NZQA standards? I think that should be able to happen, and I think we need to make the assessment processes for that a lot easier. So a lot more opportunity to use recognition of current competence as a methodology for assessment in that space. Training, like I said in the first part of my conversation, takes place widely within the sector. I don't think we should see that as being a bad thing, and I don't necessarily think we have to align it to NZQA standards, but if we could, and it means that we've got a deliberate career pathway which leads to a number of other things, and being able to move with an industry, then we should be doing it. Break down the barriers, and that's about resource, I think, often in organisations
and
as well.
delivering what industry needs.
Yep. And often that doesn't happen, so yeah.
Alex?
I've got a slightly different view on that,
Okay,
which is
great.
having worked
Love it.
in the sector, and most of you probably have, we've all done alignment of training, and part of the reason that we've done that is so that we can hit our volume targets for the end of the year. So I will be, upfront with that, and how many of you in the room have probably done that in some way or another? So my question really is there a need for that? What would be the value proposition for an employer? And I think until we can actually sell that as a clear value proposition for the employer, I think we're,
To undertake the formalisation,
to
is
do
that
the
what you're saying?
formalisation piece, unless there is some sort of, and there was a question there
About
earlier around,
mandated training.
mandated training, and yes, mandated training really helps us hit our volume targets, but even then, particularly in our industry, we are lobbying really hard on the fact that some of the safety that is inbuilt into the mandated apprenticeship training is there to protect public health and safety, and they use the NZQA framework to do that. Is that the best way to audit safety? I'm not sure. So I'm sort of out on that one.
Could be a conversation for another time, perhaps.
Yes,
For sure.
I think safety's a different conversation again, though, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah. So, anything that's going to be safety orientated is always going to have an NZQA element of compliance, and thinking about the legislation that underpins that. So,
possibly.
Yeah. Okay, let's talk more. That's cool.
It's a really interesting point, though, because the legislation doesn't often back what we need in the sector either.
Yeah.
So there's a bit of a push me pull you kind of situation there with what comes first, or what is recognised, what is used to recognise. Okay, Glenn, question from Glenn. Would there be an appetite for group employment schemes who work with industry to train apprentices? When apprentices complete and employers want to hire a tradesperson, there is a reasonable fee paid to help recover some of the costs of a quality training system. Really interesting question. There's lots of parts to that, and there are a few group employment schemes in the electrical space, for example, but none that I know of that work in the infrastructure space at all. Alex, any thoughts on that, particularly around the fee being paid to recover the costs of a quality training system?
I think group employment schemes serve a really important role, particularly if you look at the economy that we're in right now. So they play a role in that, and I think that if employers are using them for their intended purpose, then 100% I would agree with that. Where they are abused by employers who will pick someone up for a couple of weeks because they've got some labour and then hand them back, I don't think that is actually the right thing to do. And so I think we need to solve that problem initially, which is how do we help smooth the ups and downs, and how do we do that in a way that is sustainable and feasible. And yes, at times when the economy is hard, government maybe should be investing a bit more, and we're sort of lobbying that in your year one and your year two, your apprentice is actually costing you quite a lot of money. So why aren't the subsidies sort of geared towards that first and second year, paid out on outcomes, not just on taking them on, with a view to then reducing that in years 3 to 4. But I wonder if Brendan's got a view on that.
I mean, there certainly are jurisdictions, internationally that have that kind of funding model, and on the face of it, makes a lot of sense because those opportunity costs for employers are hitting much earlier in that training pathway. So, something certainly to look at, I think. If you're going to reimagine how the investment system works, it's got to be more transformative than simply some direct replacement for some other kinds of outcome input measures. Probably got a lot of value, and I think we do recommend in the final report that there's a comprehensive performance framework underpinning it. If I can just make a quick observation around the conversation about non-accredited training, there's these dodgy backward countries in Europe called Austria and France. I don't know if anyone's heard of them. Quite small, I think. But what they do have are pathways for people that haven't gone through formal training to get the kind of professional accreditations that we're talking about. I mean, clearly you want to make sure they know what colour wire to connect to what other thing. This is about as much as I know about electricity, but there are other ways to do this, and certainly one of the things that we recommended in the report was looking at that whole mix of policy, regulatory funding settings that do constrain innovation in the system.
Yeah, I'm going to come back to the questions, and we do have, I think, 3 or 4 minutes left, but I just wanted to pick up on the funding following the learner conversation because you've talked about this for 15 or 10 years, was it? You've talked about it for a long time. Yeah, and Rebecca and I have also been around conversations. So can we do it? Or is it beyond our capability? I'm pushing some buttons here, but can we do it? Can we look at funding properly following a learner through their education journey?
We can do any manner of things. I think it's more about the will, and being able to track learners is something that happens across the system currently. Being able to negotiate different approaches to how government funding's spent is possible. It does happen. It tends to be a bit ad hoc. I think all of these things are possible, but I think one of the things that will be talked about here later on is the notion that there needs to be some sort of strategy underpinning some of the choices that are made.
Yeah.
I mean, I think if you'd asked us maybe a year or two ago, we may have given you a different answer to what we would have given you today with the ability of using AI and how quickly that's being adopted. So if you look at the fact that, TC has 50 million categories for programs based on level and colour and all of that, I can't see why we couldn't look at different groups of learners, albeit they will have very unique needs, but a lot of those needs will be largely able to be characterised in some way. And so I think if you're asking me the how, I think, we definitely could look at the how. I think if you're asking, is it a good idea? Absolutely, it's a good idea. We're all unique, we're all different, and we've got a generation now coming through the system that expects personalisation. I open my phone, I expect everything that I see on Insta to be everything that I'm interested in, and so they're wanting the same experience when they're engaging with an education system, and so I think the least that TC could do is entertain that.
Yeah, Rebecca, any thoughts?
I think it could give confidence to employers that they know that they're bringing somebody on board that's got a sum of money that's been allocated to them, or whatever it looks like. They've got some pre-employment training and they're kind of carrying through. So it de-risks some of it for them, and I think from that proposition it would probably be something that employers would look at. I guess, the how is a very different thing. And, as we move more towards digital identities, I think that would be something that people would be really interested in. How do they actually manage the digital privacy issues that might sit with people as they move between employers or move between different training providers? So where is that information kept and how is that managed would be something I think people would be interested in.
Lots of devil in the detail on that one.
Yeah, there is.
Yeah. Brenden, you look prepped and ready to go.
I think that's one of the powerful opportunities that the Navigator model that we're proposing offers. We already have good experience in this country of whānau order, of enabling good lives, of actually organising support for individuals around where they are and what they require. It's a challenge, but actually that option might provide some continuity for people right the way through their the early parts of their careers and into more fulsome working life. So.
Marius has stood up, which means that I'm going to get the chop in just a second. I had a really violent reaction to the question, thoughts on bonded system for apprenticeships that could give security to employers for their investments in training. From a diversity, equity and inclusion perspective, I struggle with that quite a lot, but I just wondered if we had any quick final thoughts on that question before we wrap for our panel today. Bonding and apprenticeships. Yeah, Rebecca's face says it all.
It happens and it doesn't work that well in our industry. People will move for 50 cents an hour and they don't care whether they're bonded or not. There's really nothing that sits behind it. But actually I think it stops innovation, and from that perspective I wouldn't be a fan of it. I'd rather see some other structures, and I think so would our industry, probably. Yeah.
100%. I mean, I think the question that we should be asking is how do we create good employers that actually empower and engage the talented workforce to stay, as opposed to do we bond them?
Yeah.
Great.
And there was one at the bottom, how interested are we in discussing changing the whole system? I'm going to leave that one with you because that's a great question for morning tea, and if you'd like to go to the source, Eve Price. Please join me in thanking our panellists for today, Brenden, Rebecca and Alex. Thanks so much. Hopefully you're sticking around for morning tea and we can have more conversation.
That was fabulous. Can I just give you something to say? Thank you, Rebecca. There's something, Alex.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Such incredible insights. If you just give me a moment, Brenden. Something for you.
Thank you so much.
Lovely. Thank you, Katherine. Fantastic conversation. Funding so many hooks in that. I come from a country that has a skills levy in place, actually, and at the time I thought that it worked well, but you never know what's in the details, as Katherine's saying, devil's in the details.